I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. I'm referred to as the Big Game Hunter because I've been hunting down leaders and staff for organizations for more than 40 years. Welcome to Job Search Radio on webtalkradio.net. Job Search Radio was launched to help you find work more easily because I believe that job hunting doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't have to be so difficult. It doesn't have to be so painful or take so long. You see, there are different skills needed to get a job than to do a job. You're competing with others to impress hiring managers to choose you to interview, choose you to hire, and choose to pay you more than they might otherwise. Each week's 30-minute show is going to look at some aspect of job search and make it easier for you to excel in the eyes of an employer so that you can get back to work or get you out of your current job into one that you really want. Today's guest is my dear, dear friend, Hal Klegman. Hal is an executive coach specializing in effective communications, business relationships, networking, and preparing executives for job changes. He spent 30 years working as an executive recruiter at Chicago-based Roy Tallman & Associates, a boutique technology search firm, retiring last year to pursue a graduate degree. He's spoken about resume writing, interviewing, and how to get hired at the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago, at DePaul University, at Columbia College, and at MIT Forums. He's currently volunteering at career services at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro while he finishes his master's degree in world history. I thought that Hal would be a great person to speak with about resume writing because of his strongly held belief that people really can write great resumes if only they had an easy-to-follow methodology to work with. Hal, welcome to Job Search Radio. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I meant what I said about thinking that you'd be a great person to speak with about resume writing.
Thank you.
Last Monday, I walked into my office, and by the time I got there, I had already received 167 resumes. And by the end of the day, I'd gotten another 138. Do you know how many were worthwhile for what my clients were looking for?
Probably no more than 3 or 4.
2. 2 people had constructed resumes that showed that they fit roles I was recruiting for out of more than 300 resumes. It's ridiculous. What could some of these people have done to do a better job of showing they fit some of these positions?
Well, this is a challenging question because in order to make a better resume, people are actually required to think. Think about the job they're applying for, think about the company they're applying to, and then think about what it is they want to say on the resume. So many resumes, and when I say so many, I'm not talking about the 80-20 rule. It's more like the 98%, 2% rule. So vast majority of resumes are all focused on what somebody is responsible for rather than what they accomplished. I'm not saying to omit what they were responsible for. I'm saying highlight what you accomplished. Put at the very beginning of a job description, after the company name and where it is, what does the company do? If you work at a bank or an insurance company, what department are you in? But if you work at Acme, I don't know what they do, so there's no context. The only 4 words that count on a resume for a professional are earned, saved, increased, and decreased, followed by a metric, or for you non-metric types, followed by a number. Earned, saved, increased, and decreased. What did you accomplish at your company? Tell me why that's a better company now, a better place to work, a better product, a better system, a better manufacturing process. Why is it better? Because you were there. It's time to brag. Subtly, but brag. What's your experience, Jeff?
People find it difficult to brag.
Very much so. And now that I'm from the north to down south, it's part of the culture down here not to brag on themselves. You're not winning anything by playing small. You're out there competing with very bright people who aren't from down south, who are willing to brag on themselves a bit, not lie, not exaggerate, and not bragging by boasting, but being able to say, I did this, it was difficult, I'm proud of it.
I don't want to lose track of something that you mentioned earlier, which was underneath the employer name, putting the what the firm does, or if you're in a well-known organization, what department or business unit you were in. I think that just makes it clearer where you fit into an organization, so that a potential employer gets some perspective.
Not only that, Jeff, but it also gives context to what was accomplished. Telling you developed an accounting process for a company, that's great, but how big was the company? It's a different process when your company had 50 people or when it has 5,000 or 50,000. Because if it's 50,000, they're probably not developing an accounting process. They probably have accountants for that.
Very true. So, earned, saved, increased, decreased, followed by a metric becomes the formula. I know when I look at resumes from my clients, I do want some of that, what I'll call job description kind of stuff. It's boring if that's all that's there, because everyone's resume kind of reads in that same boring, flat way. So I want to know that someone may have supervised 3 people who are manufacturing something, or that they had managed 16 people on site and offshore developing systems. But I also know that what's going to separate the exceptional talent from the average person is exactly what you're talking about. What did they accomplish? Quantify it for me. Talk in terms of dollars and cents. What you see.
Very much so. Very much so, Jeff. One of the things that I've developed, and over 30 years, you and I have talked about this so many times. One of the things I've developed is a method for describing what you've done. Everything someone has been challenged to accomplish at work can be described as a problem to be solved. So without writing down problem I solved, but putting it into a coherent written form, what was the problem you were asked to solve? What resources did you have to solve it? Time, technology, people, access, whatever it was. What solution did you come up with? And what were the results of implementing your solution? That's what goes on a resume. In preparing for the interview, you take that project and you write down step by painful step, and you list them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exactly how you went about solving the problem. And that way when you're asked, well, how did you do that? You have a coherent answer instead of an eye roll.
Interesting. Because it's very much in line with one of my philosophies, which is by the time they get to the interview, they need to be telling stories. And what it sounds like is in your resume formula, you're getting them ready for telling stories because they're going to be doing it in the resume.
Absolutely, and they need to keep in mind that the story needs to be told as a general overview first, because you don't have more than 45 seconds. After 45 seconds, and often after 40, fewer seconds if you're really boring, the person interviewing you is going to have their mind wandering. They'll be thinking about lunch. So keep your answers to 45 seconds. Ask at the end of 45 seconds, would you like more information? If they say yes, be prepared to talk for another 45 seconds. If they say yes a second time, be prepared to talk for 2 minutes. So it's important when writing the resume to know what you're going to say about it on an interview, and rehearse, rehearse, rehearse.
That's a show of itself. There's a lot to cover in the way of interviewing, and I know we're going to be doing that in other shows, Hal. I want to come back to resumes, if I may.
Sure.
I don't think our listeners need reminding that they need to check for spelling mistakes and shouldn't lie in their resume. What do you think of you?
They need to check for mistakes, and yes, they do need to be reminded. And they can't do it themselves. You need to have somebody else check your resume. I'm writing 2 big papers every week, and I need someone else to proofread them. You can't edit your own stuff.
Interesting. I know there's a lot of resumes I look at where there are words that, when misspelled, are correct words. So for years, I learned to visually check for the word novell. I'm dating myself with technology, which was spelled Novell, because people would mistakenly, or the keypad would stick, and it would spell out novel with one L. And that, of course, would make it through the spell checker.
Absolutely. If it wasn't for spell checker named Mrs. Klegman, my clients and my professors would think I was a moron because I don't spell very well.
So what do you think about objectives?
Waste of time or a great idea. And there's no way of projecting which it's going to be. There's two kinds of managers, those who pay careful attention and those who ignore them. Unless you're a perfect fit, in which case just say, I'm looking for a job as, and that's it, and that's the only job you're interested in, that's great. Otherwise, keep them meaningless, keep them short, keep them unpretentious, and that's it. They're kind of a waste of space, and they need to be there. They're sort of expected. Not having them is often
the truth of it, Hal. What I find is most objectives are, they're innocuous, and I'd rather use the real estate to move up important keywords for searching, or important information that people can see in the first screenshot that someone's going to look at their resume for, than have that sort of boring statement that says, I want to work for a progressive organization where my skills will be valued and I can move up the ranks of the organization to the point where I can become emperor of the universe.
You might as well just say I'm looking for a job.
And that's why I don't really like objectives, because they don't really say anything.
Exactly. There's two kinds of resumes here that are functional and good. One is the kind of resume that's going to a manager who's going to make a decision looking at the resume, and the other is the kind of resume that's going to be scanned. Scanned resumes need to be full of words that will trick the computer into thinking, oh, this person's perfect, we should pull this resume out and actually have a human being read it. Because I didn't deal with companies like that, I can't really speak about those types of resumes. For resumes that are going to a human, I believe that at the front of the description of a problem, you need to have one of those 4 words: earned, saved, increased, and decreased. And that should be the first thing in bold on a resume. You don't need to put professional experience in bold in a larger typeface. You don't need to put education in bold in a larger typeface. And just by the way about education, if you went to a Tier 1 school that is universally recognized as a Tier 1 school, a Stanford, a Yale, a Princeton, Carnegie Mellon, it goes on the top of your resume before your work history for the entirety of your career. Your resume will be read differently. You paid a lot of money for that degree, and you work real hard to get into that school. It's important to put that up top. Otherwise, I see summaries, to change subjects, pretty much a waste of space for the kinds of resumes that go in front of managers. They're full of platitudes. I'm a good people person. And they're not, the technical stuff isn't attached to a project. So most of my clients, in fact, all of my clients, simply didn't read summaries. And I know that if there's any outplacement professionals listening to this, they're going to be very upset at hearing that. Managers are not interested in summaries. They're interested in metrics. They want to know about numbers. So make those numbers the first thing and the only thing that's highlighted, because that's where the manager's eye will go when he reads it. And when he sees a number that's positive, that you've accomplished something, he'll read the rest of the resume. Resume has 3 purposes: Its first purpose is to get read. That's what highlighting that accomplishment, that number does. Second purpose is to arouse an eager desire to meet you face-to-face, or at the very least, talk to you on the phone. And that's what that job description, that description of what you've accomplished and what effect it had on the company, that's what that should do. And the third is to manage the interview to a certain degree, and I think we'll leave that subject for the next time we chat.
And you're right about that. The one example of a useful summary is not when it's going to be directed to a hiring manager initially, but where it's going to an applicant tracking system, or you're posting it on a job board. Because to me, that's the area of the document where you need to use search engine optimization ideas in order to position your resume so an applicant tracking system is fooled into thinking that you're the ideal person. Because most of these systems are constructed in a way where they're looking for initial keywords in the first third to half of the first page, and then reoccurring at regular intervals later in the document. So unless they appear at the beginning of the resume, the firms evaluate it and offer a percentage lower about potential fit than if you SEO the resume like I'm talking about. So when all is said and done, you're right, Hal. If it's going directly to a hiring manager or it's being brought to a hiring manager by someone who works at the firm who's referring you, then skip the summary. It's unnecessary. But if you're applying for a job through, the front door, as I'll call it, with HR, with applicant tracking systems, with a more formal process, then you need to include it in there.
I thank you, Jeff. I didn't know that about, because I don't have experience working with companies that are running resumes through computers to choose. I know this is going to be great information for the students that I'm working with now, that it not only has to appear, the keywords not only have to appear in the first third, they have to appear X number of times throughout the resume. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And each system is set up a little bit differently. So, it's hard for me to speak about them as a universal entity that all behave in a particular way. Some firms want tighter fits than others and will ratchet up the screening so that they'll have an expectation of a certain number of repetitions. And unless your resume has it, it's ignored.
Yes, very true.
And if it is eventually looked at by someone, they're going to want to look for that reinforcement as well. So that's the time really to do it, is if you're applying through the front door to include an SEO-optimized summary at the beginning of the resume. So, Hal, I've got to ask you a question.
Okay, ask me a question. It's an interview. You're supposed to ask me questions.
I forgot. I'm sorry. Most people I represent want to know the answer to this question. Are you ready?
Okay.
Chronological or functional?
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to ask me boxers or briefs. No. And I was going to answer you, but too late now.
I'm not going down that road.
Yeah. Well, where you work needs to be chronological. What you did at a particular employer does not need to be chronological. My experience with functional resumes is they tend to be the resumes of people who either have had too many jobs or they're people that want to change careers. If you've had too many jobs, you're going to have to put your employers on there somewhere. So you definitely want to hit the high spots of what you've accomplished in a functional resume. If you're looking to change careers, this is not my expertise. So I tend to go for the employers need to be chronological, the projects do not, and you don't need to put every project on a resume. You need to put the projects on a resume that illustrate your mastery over the skills you want someone to purchase from you, because your skills are commodities. Your ability to use those skills is your value. I just made that up. Thank you.
How far back do you think someone should go in their resume? And again, if you're a 5-year person, you want to include all 5 years, but, some people listening to this show may have 25 years of experience. How far back do you think you should go?
I don't care what you did 5 years ago. If it was in technology, it's outdated. If it was, 3 years ago for the most part. But if I see a whole lot of detail about things you did 6, 7, 8 years ago, and not a whole lot of detail about what you've done in the last year and a half to 2 years, that's a warning sign to me. And Roy Tolman and Associates, being the kind of boutique search firm it is, very, very picky. So those resumes tended to get pushed aside. I had a friend that was a recruiter for a very large Chicago-based insurance company, and she once said to me, she goes, Hal, we would kill to get our hands on the applicants Roy Tolman and Associates rejects. So we were special, and we got to work with some very, very bright people.
And I know in the work that I do, Hal, I deal in a broader clientele that you did. And
you certainly do.
When we went past the 10-year mark, anything in the person's background really had little appeal to our clients. If it was in IT, the technology was outdated. If it was in accounting and finance, I would have been shocked if someone was hired based upon something they did 10-plus years ago.
Exactly. It's what have you done for me lately?
That they rose through the ranks from that role to where they are today. And if they were in the same type of role as they were 15 years ago, it was unlikely my clients were going to hire them.
It's true. And it's not to say that you have to constantly get promoted to be of value. There are a lot of people who don't want to move into management. They're very good at what they do. They're satisfied with their life, and there's nothing wrong with that. The question then becomes, why are they looking for a new job? And, those are part of the entirety of the process of getting hired in a new employer. There's so many questions to ask. And, of course, I am a big fan of the question you put out in one of your books for the best question. I think the title was the best question you could ever ask on any interview.
The single best question you should ask on any interview.
Available on Amazon. It's a great book, and it's a great question. Why don't you share it, Jeff?
So when someone, how most interviews start off with them saying, tell me about yourself. And you do. And then the parties go back and forth a bunch of times until they eventually say, so do you have any questions for us? You say, tell me about the job. They do that. And unfortunately, by the time you get the answer, it's really too late to do anything with the information to make it useful for you winning the job. So my philosophy is as soon as you walk in the door and you sit down, or both of you sit down for the interview, rather than waiting for them to speak, I'm going to use you as an example, Hal, in this situation. I spoke with Hal Klegman about the role, and he gave me a brief description. But I want to get your take on it. Could you tell me about the role as you see it and what I could do to help you? And by doing that, you get the information at the beginning of the interview, where you have an opportunity to use it effectively to talk about your experience as it relates to what the firm is looking for, rather than at the end of the interview, where it's only useful for you.
Absolutely. I have counseled people I've counseled my coaching clients that are consultants to use that question when sitting down with managers. It's very effective. When it comes to...
I remember you once telling me that the two best job applications ever written were Sun Tzu's The Art of War and Machiavelli's The Prince. Would you explain that to everyone?
Absolutely. The Art of War was originally directed at the King of Wu, and there is a whole story that goes with that he was invited in to demonstrate what he knew, and he used the king's concubines to demonstrate it. And I'm not going into that story now. Needless to say, it worked, although he had to behead the king's 3 favorite concubines to do so. Machiavelli's The Prince is very directly directed to Lorenzo de' Medici. It's right there in the opening few pages. And what they've done in each of these is say, these are my thoughts, this is how I go about it, this is what a great ruler does, this is how you win. And, of course, not everybody writes as well as Machiavelli, and certainly there aren't that many people today who can write in Renaissance Italian or ancient Chinese. That said, even in translation, these are 2 brilliant job applications.
If I'm not mistaken, that was your history major coming out on us.
It's my history major definitely coming out on you, and I've only been a history major since I'm 66. I've been doing that, talking about those 2 things for 30 years.
Amazing. Hey,
go on.
We're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure I cover this last point. Looking beyond resumes, what do you think the biggest mistake job applicants make is?
They come into the interview with misguided ideas. 5 minutes before the job interview, the manager is not reviewing your resume. 5 minutes before the job interview, the manager is thinking, I don't have time for this. Is there someone else who can talk to this person? Oh, hi, nice to meet you. Glad you could stop by. Managers are not looking for a reason to hire. They're looking for a reason not to hire. And applicant after applicant feed them reasons. They blow it with the first question. Tell me about yourself. The applicant proceeds to give them information that's easily seen on their resume. I have a formula. Take 10 to 15 seconds and tell me something personal about yourself that's not on the resume. 10 to 15 seconds and tell me something you did that's noteworthy that's not on the resume. And take 10 to 15 seconds and tell me about your long-term goals. Not your goals for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, your long-term goals. Because they're not hiring you to be a manager, the manager that you really want to be. They're hiring you to do a specific job. If it's a management job, then that's obviously a different situation. But I would say those are some huge mistakes. There's expectations that are simply not met when they walk into an interview because the manager's looking for reasons to discard them. Anything else, Jeff?
I just want to agree with you about that idea that managers are often very busy in trying to pass the buck and staring at their watches going, crap, I wish I didn't have to do this now, trying to enroll someone else in it. And your job is to get their focus as quickly.
One more point, if I could, Jeff.
Please.
Every manager, except an owner, in any hierarchy, again, except the owner, a manager is only looking for one thing when they make a decision to hire someone. It doesn't matter what the position is. It doesn't matter what the industry is. Managers in a hierarchy only want one thing from a new employee: make them look good. And the only way to find out how to make them look good is essentially to ask you a question, Jeff. I phrase it somewhat differently. What needs to be accomplished? What are your priorities? And what you're really asking them is, when you get reviewed, what are you going to get reviewed on?
And that's what I do at the end of the interview, because once I've taken out that tell me about the job question, it has to get replaced with something. And thus, what are your priorities? And if for a year from now I were to sit down for a review with you, and I hadn't just done an average job, but I'd done an exceptional job, what might I have accomplished during that year that would cause you to give me such a review?
That's a great question, Jeff. Where'd you get that?
You, of course.
Okay, just checking.
Thanks for joining me today. How can
You're very welcome.
reach you for coaching or resume writing services?
Absolutely. Let me, my name is Hal, H-A-L, Klegman, K-L-E-G-M-A-N. I am on LinkedIn, full of bragging there. Or you can reach me directly by email, Hal Klegman, H-A-L-K-L-E-G-M-A-N @gmail.com. I'm a pretty effective coach. Got some pretty happy clients.
I know you do.
Jeff? Thank you.
You're welcome. Folks, Job Search Radio is going to be back next week on webtalkradio.net with more advice to help you find work. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. If you would be interested in personalized job search coaching from me, come to VIPpersonalsearch.com, or if you have a question, call me via liveperson.com, where I'm a job search expert. So this is Jeff Altman. Hope you have a great day, and I hope to have you back next week for more of this show. Take care.